Rising stars outside OPEC Plus. This is Cleveland Jones. Let's read a little bit the initiatives of Professor Jones. He's a consultant in oil industry and researcher at ENOG, Welsh University, and Geoscience Advisory Board of NXT, Energy Solutions of Canada. He's handling consulting assignments on geopolitical implications of developments in the energy industry. This is me, Armando Cabanha. Professor Cleveland, what countries, what regions are becoming influential, worldwide speaking, in global energy? I mean, replacing OPEC plus capacities?
Yeah, Kavai, I think that the way we look at this is that we have to have a global view. For a long, this gives us a global view. The USGS, for example, has assessed all plays throughout the world. Basically, this is not new. This is a 2011 or 12 map, but those assessment units are known for a long time. What is different is that some of those end up being developed more or less because of other criteria other than just geological favorability. Because as there's recent discoveries that people get excited. So this is a starting point. But what we've seen in the last 5 years or so, even before the war in Ukraine and so on, is that there are rising stars in the world.
You mean
Outside OPEC in particular.
the red ones are the rising stars?
No, the red ones are general assessment units that are known sedimentary basins with oil potential that could conceivably produce oil and gas. But it includes, for example, Arctic exploration, which I've said this before, I don't think that's going to take off. Russia can't do it alone. Other countries aren't interested. And we have plenty of other plays to work with. It's not that we don't have enough plays in the world. We have many. What we need is investment dollars to go there so that exploration can happen, and then you can develop things. The Middle East, of course, most of the OPEC production and reserves there is already going, and it may change. I think we have to look outside of OPEC because OPEC is nowadays playing the game where it's more or less trying to stabilize production because that is in their interest and prices. And so now the players that are outside that strategy are the ones that have the cards. And I think this is a change from maybe 10 years ago or more. If we go to the next slide, look, the United States has for the last 10 years or so been a major player because it has been able to grow its oil and gas production drastically, basically on the strength of the shale plays. And if you look down in the Texas area, the Permian has been the workhorse. But if you look here, there's a lot of other plays that are beginning to come alive. And this wave of merger and acquisitions and so on has brought to light the fact that now we see other basins beginning to come up. The Eagle Ford, which is even closer to the Gulf of Mexico, has great advantages. The Barnett, and even the Appalachian, because it's near the Northeast demand centers. So everything seems to be going right there. Investment is flowing. Of course, it is the United States. So, safety and regional independence moves in favor of development of those basins. I think that we have underestimated the potential of the shale basins. People were excited a while back, and then they said, well, now we don't have so many rigs and so on. You don't need them. Technology is taking care of it.
The special reason is the advantage on shale gas and oil.
Yes, that is the key. On the other hand, I have been an offshore guy and so on. So go to the next slide. the next slide, we talk about the other U.S.
Oh, sorry.
play, which is the Gulf of Mexico, because the shale plays are onshore, they're very important. But this just shows you where the shale production has been growing steadily, and I think it will continue to grow, maybe even accelerate a little bit. So you could see very important overall growth because we're growing from a large level already. Incrementing 5% or something like that, that's a lot of oil, new oil. But if we go beyond the shale basins, go to the next slide. The Gulf of Mexico is
but only a question, please. This 14 million barrels a day is only for oil, not gas, of course. Is barrel of oil equivalent? No, barrel of oil only.
Yeah, but I agree. Very heavy gas-oriented production, but there are many shale basins which are shale oil basins, and those were for a long time, the key growth mechanisms. But I think the oil and gas is an overall importance, because if it's gas, they eventually will be able to convert it into natural LNG. Sorry, that is a growth area. So it doesn't matter if it's not really oil.
Okay.
The growth will be both. Okay. Oil is particularly important in the northern shale basins, but it's also in the Gulf area. And then you have the Gulf area advantage that everything is right there. It's offshore, and we're going into deeper areas nowadays, but it's still the U.S., a tremendous favorable geology, no environmental problems worse than anywhere else, very strong infrastructure, favorable productivity. We're talking, wells that can produce 5,000 barrels a day. The reserves, if you look at the official numbers, you can say, well, maybe it's only 5 or so billion. In fact, it's a lot more. We're talking about 40 billion barrels available there because of growth and recovery factors, new areas. You're going into slightly different areas down south and east. So the story is the United States is the driving force. We're talking onshore, shale basins, and we're talking offshore.
Yeah, but when we talk about Gulf of Mexico, we are saying more low deep water, no deep water. I mean,
deep waters. In fact, the Gulf of Mexico has some of the deepest water operations other than Brazilian waters, and very deep reservoirs as well. 7,000 meters. That is not a technical insurmountable problem because we have technology to deal with that. Hurricanes are a problem, but that's seasonal.
Yeah, the problem. But they have detachable FPSOs. They can stop, and they have technology for that.
So you lose some days, weeks during the year, but that's not an insurmountable problem.
And is in the side of United States, not going to Mexico area. Is more.
You see, this magical red lines there is basically because Mexico has just not done its homework, has not done nothing. It hasn't done anything, and it hasn't let anybody else do anything for its oil and gas industry. It has been nationalistic, saying, "Oh, Pemex will do everything," and Pemex doesn't do anything.
Pemex don't work alone. Every time with partnerships. Let me interrupt you because George Oliveira is good evening from Lisbon for you too.
Good evening,
welcome.
George Oliveira.
Thank you. But only in partnerships. They do not have technology enough to do alone.
Exactly, and that's the problem. They don't, and they're unwilling to really enter into the partnerships that would break the logjam that they are in. That is one of the reasons why Mexico, I don't believe has much potential for
Yeah.
any growth. Will probably remain, more or less even. And there is no real expectation that policies would change as long as the government is oriented the way it seems to be right now, even with the new president.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because the Gulf of Mexico overall is very attractive.
Attractive.
I
Yeah.
would say that the lower part of the Gulf of Mexico, near the onshore Mexican land, is probably very attractive. I can't compare it because we just don't have enough data, but I would say that is very prospective. But at this point, it would take 10, 15 years to really
Yeah. No,
develop that. We're beyond
impossible to wait.
2030, and that's too
Yeah.
difficult to look
Yeah.
at.
It's coming the same in Brazil with equatorial margin.
Exactly. It's a long-term play. But if go to the next one, if we start talking about Brazil, what we have to talk about is maybe the equatorial margin. I talk about it later, but it's the pre-salt, and that's because the pre-salt is it's going strong. It's a well-known area, favorable geology, many discoveries. So you're not the understanding of the oil systems and so on are there. We have
And
many prospects.
many different companies applying money in this game. So not
Finally,
Petrobras alone.
yeah, finally we have big operators, Shell, BP, Equinor, working in the area as operators as well. That is very positive, as well as many other majors that are not necessarily operators, but they can, change that at any time if they go into new areas and so on. It's still the place to be, that I have always insisted that, in terms of resources that can be produced, we're talking 160 billion barrels that can still be discovered and produced. And this is, not way into the future, because this is basically dependent on exploration efforts, drilling campaigns.
I know that you and Professor
Hernani.
Dani, you have a study that shows that the number could be almost 200 billion barrels reserves.
Yeah, up to
but we have proven,
270 billion. Yes.
yeah, but we have
We don't want
proven
to say
only,
that because people don't even imagine that.
but the proven reserves is around 12 or 14.
Well, one thing is proven, the other thing is known. And the problem with proven is that the companies, not just Petrobras, Shell, Exxon, all of these, they know that there's a lot more, something around 50 billion barrels.
And why
That
is
is
not proven?
known resources that can be produced. So if they wanted to, they could probably certify those as reserves. Of course, they don't want to because they don't want to have.
What's missing to certify these reserves?
Basically nothing. But if they do, then they have all kinds of obligations to develop those. And the companies say, hey, I can declare that when I'm ready to invest, and I can wait another year. That is a problem. But again, I think that is a problem, not technical or geological. It's a political problem. If Brazil were slightly more friendly or less enigmatic, or if it had clear policies, I think a lot of those decisions would have been taken already.
But in reality, if you have 170 billion barrels in reserves, you have a long production time.
Yes, obviously it would take a long time. From the current 4-something million barrels, I've always argued Brazil should be up to the 10 million barrel, because even the current discoveries could allow that if there were enough money for new FPSOs and all that. But even at 10 million barrels a day, it would take almost to the end of the century to produce all of that.
So what's the reason to explore equatorial margin if we have this?
Other countries, other regions in the world will not be producing as much. And so
need to replace
the onus will be on the U.S. and Brazil and the other countries that I can mention to bring up that production to make up for the shortfall in other regions that are slowly degrading. and some of them
Perfect.
fast. I talk about Russia and other places that
Yeah.
where production is expected to fall 3 million barrels a day by 2030.
And
That is going to have to be made up by someone.
what the colors represent this in this chart?
Okay, these are by the bidding rounds. So the central blue area is the main area. Outside of that is still pre-salt region. It's just not the defined, legally defined boundary, but there's still oil prospectivity, and bidding rounds have submitted those areas for exploration, and companies are looking at that and doing seismic and other surveys because those are prime areas. We know that the oil is there somewhere. What is needed is exploration campaigns, doing better 3D and other types of surveys, some of which we're even involved in proposing. But once you have that, if you drill and you find oil, it's just a question of development. And development is relatively quick because ordering an FPSO and getting it in place is basically under 5 years, 3 years or something. So you could really speed up production. I think that is one of the reasons why an established play like the pre-salt can provide much more surprises on the upside. A long time ago, Brazil had an expectation that it could produce up to 7 million barrels. Then everything fell apart. And then expectations were, we'll stay around 4 or 5. I think we're coming back again to realize that the pre-salt itself can produce enough to take Brazil back into the 5, 6, and 7 million barrel range
the
by
next 10 years. Yeah, okay.
So no, equatorial margin, because you can't forget that, and it's not necessarily because of Brazil. And I've said this to you a couple of times. Brazil has equatorial margin basins, even in Foz do Amazonas and other regions, but none of those, I believe, are really going to take off very soon. It will take tremendous effort and a new way of exploring and so on. But the established plays in the equatorial margin are Guyana and Suriname.
That's a good point. So countries north of Brazil are just exploring this equatorial margin.
They got on the bandwagon a couple of years ago, or over 5 years ago.
The operational risks that they take are similar that we would take if we have approved the permission to explore.
Yeah, no? But you see, the equatorial margin, first of all, we talk about geological favorability, which is strong in this region. It might even be strong in the Brazilian basins, but they're much further behind. So to catch up, it would take 5, 7 years at least, and maybe 10. So there is a big difference between, being ready and actual having geological favorability. Brazil might have that, and there are fields known along the equatorial margin in Brazil, especially towards the corner of the South American continent. But basins that have been explored, produced large discoveries, and Guyana is now in the 10 plus billion barrel range, and probably a lot more that are known, and just like Brazil, not yet declared. So we're on the road to seeing 15 and 20 billion barrels being declared. And that is already advanced because they have, already started producing and so on. And Suriname is a little behind. That's the difference.
Yeah. And do you believe, Professor Jones, that they are planning to permit this exploration soon?
Yes, there's really no environmental reason why you shouldn't really. Obviously, I can't speak for an environmental license, but if you look at the situation, there is nothing that the oil companies operationally cannot mitigate a risk of oil spills, a risk of operational safety, a risk of impacting with their operations, even onshore areas and so on, which was claimed to be a risk. But
normal risks.
Yeah, those risks have long been administered by the oil companies operating responsibly. and they
Mhm.
have been doing so. Now,
It's more a
the
political issue
equatorial,
than.
yeah, no, the equatorial margin is much more challenging than the pre-salt, for example, in the sense that currents are very strong. You do have higher operational risks from sea conditions and so on. It's not like the North Sea, but
Uh-huh.
there are higher risks, yes. But
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
manageable. Technology is there
Sure.
to do that.
Sure. Sure. Totally
So
available.
I believe that Guyana is already on a good path. Suriname is coming strong, and I believe if they decide to pursue the same path, they could even shorten the growth phase from initial exploration to production. Guyana was fast, but I think Suriname could even surpass that speed and also get some major areas into production.
Checking your picture, we can see that in Venezuela we do not have the same colors of Guyana and
No.
Suriname.
Okay.
Why?
Again,
Why?
forgive me. I write Venezuela off the map.
Ah,
I know they have the largest reserves in the world, which is Balderdash. Those reserves don't count. They probably have 20 or 30 billion barrels of offshore reserves. And those are probably producible, certainly not under the conditions in which they operate now politically.
uh,
And that's going to take, even if that changes, which is not likely to change soon, that's going to take 5, 7 years to fix everything and to get a. So,
yeah,
write that off. By
take too long.
2030,
Yeah,
nothing's going to happen.
yeah, yeah.
And,
Okay,
and
go
people were
to the.
saying Venezuela is improving production. Yes, they came from 700,000 to 800,000
Yeah,
barrels.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
give me a break.
And was 3 million the past, so it's so
Exactly.
different.
I mean, the recovery is minimal, and I think
Yeah,
they're going to get into a brick wall because there's a lot of existing
yeah,
barriers to great.
yeah. Call your attention to Paula Kerber here with us. Good evening, Paula. Thank you for
Good
coming.
evening to you, Paula. So, I mean, it's not an ideological thing. It's really that when a country is so dismantled as Venezuela has been, it's impossible to get things back in order to start producing or getting back to 3 million like it was at some point
Yeah, but
in under 10 years. It
yeah,
just
but
won't
but
happen.
take care because our president is friend of the
Oh,
Venezuela's
yeah,
president.
they
So
can help them a
yeah,
little bit, but not with oil.
yeah, not well. Yeah,
But there
Africa.
are other areas that are interesting to watch because we have seen activity really spike upwards in West Africa, and there are some regions that have decent resources. I think some of them are probably overstated, but the plays are niche plays, which
Yeah,
means
but
that
then
if
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah,
Why Africa coast is not the same attractiveness of Brazil's coast?
no,
What's the
I mean,
reason?
geology doesn't work like that. It's not a perfect symmetry. As it was spreading, someone up there decided that this side was going to have a lot more prospectivity than Africa. And indeed, it turned out. It doesn't mean that they don't have good fields, but there is no uh, comparison in overall potential. We're
Mhm.
talking about up to 300 billion barrels on the western side, and on the African side, we're talking, maybe 100 if we put everything together, of which maybe
Is
50.
a geological motivation? Is the movements of
Exactly.
Earth? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And indeed, there are interesting niche plays which correspond to Brazilian and Argentinian and so on plays,
Yeah.
but and
Recently,
equatorial margin plays,
r-
but they're niche plays.
yeah.
They're not another
Recently we
pre-salt.
received. Recently we see that Namibia or which
Yeah,
country that has a great and Brazil
exactly.
is interested in it.
Yes, even Angola. So these are countries with um, great experience in producing oil because they have been long time oil producers. But now we look at the extension towards the north east, and you
Yeah.
see Gabon and all these other
But
countries are
but
getting in on the
but
action.
but can they become let's say important producers in the future or
Okay, I
medium
think
size?
this is where we have to put scale into the question because rising star means if you're producing zero and you start producing By 2030, you can produce 400,000. You're a star. Gabon, Angola might increase something like that. Namibia, that is a star. But again, if we put that in the context of 3 million barrel
Global
increase that we
volumes.
expect
Yeah.
for the U.S., 2 million for Brazil, that's small.
Yeah. For
But
instance,
it is
United
still a
States,
star for a small country.
yeah, yeah.
And indeed, that's
14
the
million barrels per
opportunities.
day is something big, great.
Yeah, I mean, round numbers. I say 500 or less, 500 to a million, or more than a million,
Yeah.
because it's difficult. It will depend basically on how good they are politically allowing investment to proceed. Because that's the problem with these countries. We knew all along that they had
Okay.
prospectivity,
Yeah.
and now we're able to pinpoint where. But the problem there is politics. Governance.
Influence of politics. Yeah.
Yeah, and the majors, of course, have to be very wary. And we spoke a while ago about this. Those
Yeah.
countries represent a major risk to a major operating company if
Yeah. That
they develop some problem with
they
corruption or
refuse.
something like
Yeah.
that. It's a stain, and they have to be very careful in how they deal with those countries. And they
Okay.
are beginning.
Let's go
Namibia, for
ahead.
example, is beginning to learn to
Yeah.
improve their legislation and so on.
Yeah.
But everywhere in Africa, we're still very wary of governance, and
Yeah.
problems that can come
Yeah.
from that.
What else you have? Uh,
Yeah, go
oh,
back.
my
No,
friend Millet.
okay. Argentina is important. Everybody talks Vaca Muerta, which is mainly gas and so
What's the
on, which
real
is
potential? Vaca Muerta is for gas, natural gas
yes, it's a
only.
real potential. The problem is to develop that potential in a different operating, political, economic, and regional environment is a challenge because
Mm.
as we showed in Texas, you have everything right there.
What's
Besides
the
being
proven
in the United
reserves?
States,
What's the
having
dimension?
access. Yeah,
Mm.
in Argentina, it's a major challenge. Getting up to scale is the main challenge.
Mm.
Once you get to 1 or 2 million barrels a day, maybe things might get a little bit easier because then you can justify pipelines and infrastructure better. We're not there yet. That's why
So
I'm saying big potential, but
no
barely by
infrastructure,
2030.
no infrastructure enough to
No.
develop this.
And this
Is
is, we see Argentina has several basins. The Gulf of San Jorge Basin has a long history of oil production. It's just going to be very difficult to develop that further. It has potential, but not gigantic potential, but it could grow. It's just not likely to grow under Argentina's current situation. Yes, new president, whatever he does, he can't do magic, and it will
the
take 5 years to get the country
yeah
back in
the
shape, and
the
another
main
5 years to produce anything
the main
major.
company is still YPF.
YPF.
Is a state company or private
Yeah.
company?
And you see, I think that's also something that could, I mean, if Millet is able to make changes and bring in more foreign capital or other companies, maybe that could speed things up a little bit. But we're saying that, yes, things could be developed in 5 years instead of 7 or 10. They're not going to produce
Yeah,
results in 3 years. We know that.
but
Five years, maybe.
but they are expecting to export to Chile or to Bolivia,
Yeah,
and Brazil
and
has
even
intention to
pipeline
buy
gas.
from Bolivia the gas from Argentina. Is it
Yeah, but
correct?
even pipeline gas to Brazil is possible because we can reverse pipelines and so on. Bolivia has a problem because their reserves are finally getting a little bit
Declining.
low. Unless they really can pick up exploration, they run the risk of not being able to maintain their exports.
Yeah.
So even we could see reverse flows, but the Bolivia is not going anywhere. Also, maybe it will be able to stem its decrease and maybe improve a little bit gas
Pro-
production. But Argentina
Professor,
is real game.
tell us, please, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. So they are all of these countries are not providing enough energy
No,
for themselves.
no,
No.
and Chile has maybe some potential way in the tip, but we discussed a while back the tip of South America. Very difficult operating conditions, no infrastructure.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking, say, by 2030, not much can happen by then.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
say 5, 6 years looks like a lot. It
Mhm.
isn't. Barely enough to get anything going. So the only real chance is that Vaca Muerta might come up with gas and liquids to be able to add maybe 500,000 barrels or something like that.
Yeah.
That would be very significant
Yeah.
for them. We could say that that's a rising star. But in terms of all the hoopla that we
No,
heard
no, it's not.
long ago,
No, no.
it's underwhelming.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The IEA put together a chart with these blue boxes representing, from the 2022 supply range or similar to today, and what countries would increase and what countries would decrease. And you can say they estimate the US to increase, Brazil, and so on. The red boxes are my boxes because I think, they underestimate some and they overestimate others. So
So
really,
let's take an example. Brazil, 2 and 1. What does it mean? This two.
it means that IEA thinks that Brazil could increase production by 1 million. I think it could increase production by 2 million barrels a day by
Oh,
2030.
okay. Okay.
And maybe even more. I mean, Brazil is in a position where it could speed things up. It depends on politics. The
Oh,
U.S. will, no doubt. It's 3 million barrels a day. It will continue growing because
uh-huh.
there's room for it to grow, and economics and geology, everything favors it.
And you
Now,
see
Guyana will
Russia,
grow, but
and you,
you
you,
huh?
you see Russia reducing 3 million barrels a day.
Yes, they estimate maybe up to 1 million. It will decrease by 3 million by 2030.
Wow.
Again, it has a little bit to do with time because IEA is talking about 2028. I don't know why they picked 2028. Let's pick a
Uh-huh.
round number, 2030. I give it 2 more years, and I think Russia will drop tremendously. And
Wow.
I
My
and I
God.
said
But
that
based
the
on
reason.
what geopolitical issues?
No, go back. Their average production is under 60 barrels a day per well. You know, some of those are beginning just to not be able to produce. And when you have so many hundreds of thousands of wells at that level, it's just not economical from a logistical everything. They have some good areas, but those are not enough to compensate for the thousands and thousands of wells that are just going to be petering out over the next five
It
years.
makes OPEC plus weaker
Oh
these days.
yes, uh, it does make it weaker. The other side is that Iran and Iraq can probably pick up some of that 3,000. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait probably won't because they're going to be moderators, but other OPEC might be able to pick up what Russia drops. But that is, I think, a big story that no one is talking about. But it's not sanctions that's going to kill Russia. Is their oil fields are just not up to producing for
Yeah.
at this rate for
Okay.
another 5 years. After
Good
that,
chart.
the drop is going to be fast.
Good chart is one, Professor. Good chart.
There are other countries. So this, I put like a summary. I think U.S., Brazil, Guyana, they're all going to be very significant uh, production increase, by the end of the decade, by 2030. And then you have Suriname is starting from scratch. So, if it goes up to 500,000, that's a lot, and that will classify as a start because,
Fantastic chart.
from zero.
Fantastic.
Uh, and then Africa overall, all of those little plays, east and west, maybe more than 1 million barrels. But that's going to be divided up between Angola, Namibia, and Mozambique. All of these countries will
But
increase some.
it's important to see that United States increasing 3 million barrels a day in the next years. So strong. How can they do this things?
This is what the shale plays were designed to do. Of that 3 million, probably only one is going to be Gulf of Mexico because that takes longer time to get going.
Mhm.
But the shale plays are, just like Ford set up, it's an industrial operation. And now you have mergers putting together these huge installations that are able to get economies of scale and grow in different ways that before you couldn't even fracture in certain
Yeah, but
directions. Now you can.
with all this expansion, but they are still importing oil because the consumption is 20 million barrels a day, and the production
Yeah,
is less than that.
overall, I think they're about even finally because it's very complicated how you measure this between gas liquids, petroleum, and so
Yeah,
on. I
condensate.
think they're very close to break even. So they're importing, they're exporting, and very close. And by 2030, they'll be a net exporter.
Yeah,
Their consumption might not go up, but their production is going up.
perfect, excellent. Let me ask you why mergers and acquisitions are becoming more attractive at this time.
It has to do with economics. It's just much cheaper, and this is something that they're taking advantage of. It's much cheaper to buy reserves and ongoing production by buying up another company than to develop those from scratch because you'd have to invest in exploration and then development and then production facilities, and that it's going to take time. You buy up another company and all of a sudden you buy up 1 or 2 billion barrels in reserves and you buy up 300,000 or 400,000 barrel production.
A provocative question for you. Do you believe that Lula and Venezuela's president are talking about merger and acquisitions between PDVSA and Petrobras?
No, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's playing
So
lip
crazy
service.
to think like this.
It's crazy because in the end, what really counts is economics and geological favorability. If geological favorability is there, but economics or political situation isn't, things don't work. So they have to be, all three have to be there. And, they're not there for Venezuela. They're not there for a lot of African countries, unfortunately. And they're not there for some Southeast Asian countries that were major producers, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. They're marginally might increase, but no stars there.
May I try a conclusion? OPEC Plus is becoming weaker, and newcomers like United States with 3 million barrels a day or more, Brazil 2 million barrels a day, are the new stars coming.
Yeah, they're the new stars. But I wouldn't go as far as saying OPEC Plus is getting weaker. Their share of overall production will go down. But I don't think that means they're going to be weaker because they're still going to be able to play the moderating influence. And given their situation, that will be enough to carry them. It's just that the growth outside of OPEC is going to be great. Yes.
Perfect.
And I don't see many of those countries joining OPEC. So they're going to remain outside of
That's
OPEC.
another question. Yeah, good question as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Receive your lessons
today. Thanks, Ryan. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye for everyone.